Why avoidants stay distant even when they're missing you. Have you ever felt like someone was missing you, yet they still didn't reach out? You knew it in your gut. The way they used to light up around you, the connection wasn't one-sided. But now there's just silence. No calls, no messages, just distance. And you're left wondering, if they miss me, why aren't they doing anything about it? Well, the answer lies in understanding something deeply frustrating, but also liberating about avoidant individuals. Avoidants are not heartless. They do miss you, but they often miss you in silence. Why? Because to an avoidant, missing someone is actually terrifying. It represents vulnerability, loss of control, and the potential for emotional chaos. What feels like connection to you can feel like danger to them. So when their heart says go toward them, their defense system screams stay away. This creates a paradox. You're sitting there thinking, they don't care. But in reality, they might care so much that it overwhelms them. And here's the real kicker: avoidants often process emotion alone. While you may reach for connection to soothe the ache, they retreat to soothe theirs. It's not personal, it's patterned. They tell themselves stories like, I need space, or they'll be better off without me. Not because they don't care, but because closeness threatens their emotional wiring. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with power. The power to stop trying to decode silence. The power to focus on someone who not only feels connection, but isn't afraid to act on it. Someone who doesn't retreat when things get real. You deserve someone who runs toward love, not away from it. Remember this: their silence is not a mirror of your worth. It's a reflection of their fear. When someone with an avoidant attachment style misses you, it might not look the way you expect. You're probably used to the idea that when people miss someone, they reach out, make contact, or try to reconnect. But avoidants often don't follow that script. Their behavior can feel cold, distant, or even indifferent, when in truth, there may be a storm of emotions happening beneath the surface. The critical misunderstanding here is that missing someone automatically leads to action. For avoidance, missing you doesn't equal movement toward you. Sometimes it means pulling even further away. This seems counterintuitive. Most people interpret longing as a cue to close the gap, but for avoidance, emotional intensity can be incredibly uncomfortable. When they start to feel connected or dependent on someone, it can trigger a defense mechanism. Instead of leaning in, they retreat to regain emotional equilibrium. The more they miss you, the more vulnerable they feel. And vulnerability to them isn't romantic, it's risky, it's a loss of control. That makes even the act of reaching out feel like too much. It's also important to realize that avoidants often aren't fully in touch with their own emotional landscape. They might not even be consciously aware that they miss you. Instead, they experience discomfort, tension, or a need to isolate, and they follow that impulse. Their mind may rationalize it: I need space. I don't want to get too dependent. Or even, they're better off without me. These justifications are attempts to make sense of the internal discomfort that missing someone brings up. They aren't necessarily lying to themselves, but they're managing the emotion the only way they know how. What adds to the confusion is that avoidants often reminisce about you in quiet moments. They may replay memories, feel a strong sense of loss, or wish things could be different. But they're unlikely to share any of that. Their longing is often passive, not active. It exists in their mind, not in behavior. You don't see the late night thoughts, the internal tug of war. You only see the distance which feels like rejection. The truth is, avoidance can feel deeply, but those feelings get locked behind a self-protective wall. Just because someone isn't knocking on your door doesn't mean they're not pacing behind theirs. But unlike people who use closeness as comfort, avoidants find comfort in solitude. That's where they feel safe enough to process. So they stay distant, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay close without feeling overwhelmed. Closeness can be one of the most triggering experiences for someone with an avoidant attachment style, even when they genuinely care about you. On the surface, it seems illogical. How can someone crave intimacy and yet push it away the moment it gets real? But for avoidance, closeness isn't just about emotional connection. It represents potential loss of control, loss of independence, and the fear of being consumed by another person's needs or expectations. The closer they feel to someone, the more exposed and emotionally vulnerable they become, and that's where the tension starts. When an avoidant begins to truly connect, they often feel conflicted. Part of them enjoys the warmth, affection, and companionship that comes from a deeper bond. But another part, an ingrained defensive part, starts to panic. That part associates intimacy with emotional entrapment. It fears that if they let someone in too deeply, they'll lose their sense of autonomy or be forced to confront emotional wounds they've worked hard to suppress. So rather than risk being overwhelmed, they pull back. They might cancel plans, become emotionally unavailable, or start finding faults in the other person as a way to justify creating space. This pullback isn't always conscious. In many cases, the avoidant person doesn't even fully understand why they're suddenly uncomfortable. They might tell themselves they need space or that the relationship is moving too fast. And while that might sound like a rational request, it's often driven by the subconscious fear of emotional enmeshment. The irony is that the more meaningful the connection, the more likely it is to trigger this response. So it's not that they don't feel anything, it's that they feel too much and they don't know how to handle it. When the fear of intimacy is stronger than the desire for connection, distance becomes a coping mechanism. The avoidant doesn't withdraw to hurt you, they withdraw to protect themselves. And this reaction is often hardwired from past experiences where closeness led to pain, pressure, or a sense of being overwhelmed. So instead of running toward what feels good, they step back from it. It's a way of maintaining emotional safety, even at the cost of the relationship. This internal conflict between wanting love and fearing it is what keeps avoidants in a cycle of connection and retreat, often confusing both themselves and the person who just wants to love them. Avoidants live in a tug of war between what they feel and what they fear. When they start to care about someone, when they begin to miss someone or feel the intensity of connection growing, it can actually activate a part of their mind that sees emotional closeness as a threat. This is where the emotional defense system kicks in, almost like an internal alarm that says, too close, too fast. Get out. It's not that they don't want connection, it's that connection feels dangerous in a way that isn't always logical or conscious. Their desire for intimacy exists, but it constantly wrestles with the instinct to protect themselves. This defense system is built over time, often rooted in past experiences where closeness led to pain, rejection, or pressure to show up emotionally in ways they didn't feel safe doing. As a result, avoidants develop a reflex to guard their inner world. When someone gets too close, even if it's someone they miss or love, the brain starts scanning for escape routes. They might suddenly become critical, focus on the other person's flaws, or convince themselves that the relationship isn't right. These aren't always rational thoughts. They're protective mechanisms meant to put distance between them and the emotional vulnerability that connection brings. Their withdrawal isn't necessarily calculated, it's reactive. They might go days without reaching out, not because they've stopped caring, but because engaging would require them to confront emotions they don't know how to manage. In many cases, they were never taught how to process or express deep feelings in a healthy way, so avoidance becomes the safest and most familiar option. It's how they maintain control. The moment they feel the intensity of missing someone rising, they instinctively shut it down, suppress it, or distract themselves with work, hobbies, or solitude. To the person on the receiving end, this can feel like rejection or emotional immaturity. It's easy to assume they don't care or that they're playing games. But in truth, their emotional defenses are simply louder than their desire to connect. They're not trying to hurt anyone, they're trying not to get hurt themselves. The tragedy is that this very defense keeps them from experiencing the closeness they often long for deep down. It creates a paradox. They miss you, they want you, but they retreat anyway because staying distant feels safer than risking the uncertainty of what might happen if they let someone in fully. For avoidance, the act of retreating into themselves when emotions become too intense is a coping mechanism they've likely developed over years, often without even realizing it. Unlike those who seek closeness when they're emotionally overwhelmed, avoidants prefer to deal with their feelings alone. This doesn't mean they don't feel. In fact, they may feel deeply, but their way of processing is private and solitary. When they begin to miss someone or feel the weight of emotional connection, it stirs up feelings of vulnerability and discomfort. And rather than share these feelings or seek comfort from another person, they retreat almost instinctively. This withdrawal is not a sign of indifference. It's a natural response to the overwhelming intensity that closeness brings. To an avoidant, sharing feelings means letting someone in, and letting someone in means opening up to the possibility of being hurt. So instead of seeking emotional connection during tough moments, they look for ways to deal with their emotions on their own. They might spend hours reflecting, engaging in solo activities, or simply isolating themselves from others in order to regain a sense of control and balance. This is how they process. It's a way for them to manage their emotional world without needing external validation or input. While this behavior can be frustrating for those who are more comfortable with open emotional exchange, it's important to understand that it's not a rejection of the other person. It's simply the way they've learned to cope with the vulnerability that closeness requires. For the avoidant, their emotional processing is solitary because that's how they learn to protect themselves in a world that, at some point, made them feel unsafe or unsupported. Sharing emotions wasn't always a comforting experience, and they've internalized the belief that doing so leaves them exposed to disappointment or pain. In many cases, avoidants don't even recognize the full extent of their emotional withdrawal. It's become a pattern, almost automatic. When things get real, they shut down emotionally, even though, on a deeper level, they may long for the connection they're avoiding. Instead of turning to the person they miss, they turn inward, trying to soothe themselves with distractions or self-reflection. It's a private battle, one that plays out in silence, leaving the other person confused and hurt. But this isolation is an essential part of how the avoidant person manages the complexity of their emotions. It's their way of maintaining some sense of emotional safety in a world where closeness feels dangerous. For avoidants, silence is not a reflection of your worth or how much they care about you. Instead, it's a reflection of their own internal struggles. When they pull away or go silent, it's easy to interpret it as rejection. But the reality is more complex. Their silence is rooted in fear, not a lack of affection or appreciation. The emotional distance they create serves as a shield, a way to protect themselves from feelings they may not feel equipped to handle. Their withdrawal has nothing to do with you personally, but rather with how they process emotions, vulnerability, and closeness. When an avoidant starts to feel deeply for someone, it often triggers a sense of danger. They've likely learned over time that the more they care about someone, the more vulnerable they become. And vulnerability feels risky to them. So their first instinct is to create emotional distance, even if they don't want to. Their silence doesn't mean they've lost interest. It's a defense mechanism against the intensity of their feelings. They don't always know how to cope with that level of closeness, so they retreat instead. They may not even recognize it as a fear response. It's simply how they've learned to handle overwhelming emotions. Moreover, avoidants often feel that being emotionally available means losing control. They associate emotional availability with weakness or being dependent on someone else, and that thought is enough to make them step back. In their mind, being too open makes them vulnerable to hurt. They may convince themselves that silence or distance will protect them from the possibility of rejection or the pressure of someone else's needs. In their heads, pulling away is a self-preserving tactic that keeps them safe from potential emotional chaos. This silence is compounded by a pattern they've developed over time. Avoidants tend to internalize their emotions. They process their feelings in isolation rather than sharing them with others. When something triggers their emotions, whether it's missing someone or confronting the vulnerability of a relationship, they retreat to figure things out on their own. Unfortunately, this leaves the other person in the dark, wondering if they've done something wrong or if the feelings are no longer mutual. But for the avoidant, it's simply their way of dealing with the overwhelming sensation that comes with emotional intimacy. It's also important to note that this silence doesn't mean that avoidants aren't thinking about you. They may miss you deeply, replay memories, or feel a longing to reconnect, but they may feel incapable of doing so in a way that feels safe for them. Their silence is not an indictment of your value. It's a reflection of the complex emotional landscape they navigate. They are often afraid of their own feelings, and that fear keeps them from reaching out, even when they long for connection. You have the power to choose the kind of emotional connection you deserve, one that is present, mutual, and emotionally available. Avoidants, with their tendency to withdraw when emotions become too intense, often create a dynamic where the relationship feels like a push-pull game. The distance they create can leave you questioning your own worth or feeling like you are constantly chasing after something that isn't coming. But here's the crucial thing. Their distance is not a reflection of your value or how much you deserve love. It's a reflection of their internal struggles. And it's not your responsibility to constantly bridge the gap or chase someone who is retreating because of their own fears. You are worthy of someone who doesn't shy away from emotional connection. A person who not only feels the same depth of emotion, but is also able to express it and act on it. When you stay in a relationship with someone who consistently withdraws, you are inadvertently training yourself to accept a connection that lacks consistency and emotional reciprocity. It may feel frustrating to constantly wait for an avoidant to come around, to hope they will be ready when they're finally able to handle their emotions. But the truth is, you don't need to wait. You don't need to put your emotional well-being on hold while someone else processes their fears. You deserve someone who can meet you where you are, who can communicate openly, who doesn't run from the depth of emotions that intimacy brings, and who is willing to engage with you emotionally in real time. It's crucial to understand that you're not asking for too much by wanting emotional availability. You're asking for what is fair, healthy, and sustainable. Instead of waiting for the avoidant to change or hoping they will eventually let down their walls, it's essential to recognize that you have control over your own emotional space and your own needs. Choosing the kind of connection you deserve means setting boundaries with those who consistently keep you in emotional limbo. You don't need to fight for someone's attention or affection when it's not being freely given. You are allowed to want someone who isn't afraid to come closer, someone who isn't intimidated by your need for closeness, and someone who isn't constantly retreating into their own world. While it's understandable to feel empathy and compassion for the avoidant struggles, remember that you also deserve someone who can engage with you emotionally in a way that's fulfilling and mutual without the constant fear of being abandoned or left in the dark. You hold the power to choose a connection that feels whole and true without constantly having to fight for it. Understanding avoidance and their tendency to stay distant even when they miss you can be incredibly eye-opening. It's easy to feel rejected or confused by their behavior, but the truth is that their silence and emotional withdrawal have little to do with how they feel about you. For them, emotional closeness feels like a threat, something that challenges their sense of control and exposes their vulnerability. When they pull away, it's not a reflection of your worth, but rather a protective response to deep-seated fears and past experiences. But here's what's empowering for you: their distance doesn't have to be your emotional burden. You don't need to chase after someone who isn't emotionally ready to meet you where you are. You deserve someone who can connect with you on a level that feels mutual, fulfilling, and consistent. You have the power to choose the kind of connection you want, one that nurtures your emotional needs and allows you to thrive without constantly seeking validation or battling silence. Remember, your worth isn't defined by someone else's inability to open up. Your value is inherent, and you deserve a relationship that reflects that. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope this message has helped bring some clarity and insight into the complex world of avoidant attachment. Remember, relationships are not about winning someone over. They're about finding mutual understanding, respect, and emotional safety. I appreciate you for allowing me to share this with you. Take care, be kind to yourself, and always choose a connection that honors who you are and what you deserve. Until next time!